Hi everyone, and welcome back to Liz Sews, and the next video in my Make It Your Own series, where I show you how to take an already well-fitting bra pattern and convert the style lines so it looks completely different. In today's tutorial, I'll be going over how to convert a horizontal seam bra into a diagonal seam bra. This also works for the other way around, if you have a diagonal seam and you want a horizontal. Just changing the angle of the seam line can give you a completely different look to the bra. But because we're starting with something that already fits, you know that you can make these style changes and not have to worry about refitting another pattern. Today's tutorial will only be going over the pattern alteration components. I don't think it's really necessary to show you how to construct this because the construction of a two-piece cup is the same whether or not the seam is running this way or this way. Here's an example of a horizontal seam bra that I've made that started out with my Black Beauty pattern. Let's get started. For this pattern alteration, you will need your cut pattern pieces, tape, scissors, a marking pen, and a straight-edged ruler. I'll also be using a curved ruler at the end when I'm cleaning up my edges, though it's not necessary for the actual pattern alteration. So the alteration that we're making is to the cut pieces by themselves. So you don't really need to pick up any of the bridge, frame, or back band pieces. We're only looking at the cup pieces. And this technique works best for a two-piece cup since we're going from two pieces to two pieces. So if you have something like the Black Beauty where the lower cup is split into two more pieces, so you might have a three-piece cup, I would combine them back into two pieces before doing this this pattern manipulation. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I want to draw a straight line from my point on the side here to my apex, and it's really easy to tell in this particular pattern because the apex is going to be the notch. That way we know that we're going to the same place on both of the upper and lower cut pieces. So I'm just going to draw a straight line and ignore the seam allowances. So a straight line from that corner here into where it hits here, and pretend that the seam allowances don't exist. Like that. So I'm going to go ahead and repeat that for the side over here as well as my upper cut piece. Now I have my 4 lines drawn on both the lower and upper cut piece here. I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut into that corner, and I want to cut all of this off. So I should have 4 pieces once I finished cutting. So now I have my 4 individual pieces. I have my lower cut piece, straight edges, and then all of that curve. Same with the upper cut piece. Now later on, we're going to be using these pieces again, so don't throw them away. But before we set them to a side, I do want to clip into my seam allowance until I meet that center notch there. I don't want to cut all the way through. I want this to still be a single piece of paper, but it'll allow me a little bit easier of a job down the road to sort of pivot on there and move it around. So I'm going to do that for both the lower and upper cut piece and then set them aside. So now that we have our 2 cut pieces with straight edges, we can start thinking about where we want the seam line to go. So I'm going to do a vertical seam, which means I want it running from the underarm section here, and I want the seam running into the bridge on the bottom over here. So the first step I'm going to do is temporarily tape these together. We want to make sure our notches are lined up right here and butt these 2 straight edges together, and then I'm just going to tape this into place. I'm going to tape it all the way across. I want to make sure that I have something that is nice and firm and stable. So the important bit is to make sure that your notches are lining up on the apex, and it's okay if it doesn't align properly at this side over here. That's something that we can fix down the road. So like I said, I want to make sure that my seam is running from my underarm seam towards the apex, and we always need to have our seam crossing through the apex of the bust. So I'm going to do a straight line from wherever I want it to be. So I'm going to go like halfway into my underarm seam and draw a straight line all the way to my apex point, like so. And once I do that, I can cut a part on that line there. Then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side over here. I'm going to take this straight edge of my upper cut piece and align it with the straight edge of my lower cut piece, making sure that my apex points meet, and it's okay if it's a little bit off on the wire line side over here. So I'm just going to tape that into place so my apex point is meeting and the straight sides are aligned. And then you can just sort of decide where you want that upper cut piece to land. So I know that this notch mark here is pretty much the dead center below the apex of my bust. So if I'm thinking about where I want the seam to come in, I'm thinking probably halfway between the bottom point and the neckline edge. So again, I'm just going to draw a straight line connecting that apex point with wherever I want my seam to end up. So in my case, I'm going to go here. What looks like, yeah, that looks about like halfway. And just drawing a straight line in there. And just like we did for the other side, I'm going to cut on that straight line. So here we have our upper cut piece and our lower cut piece. Basically, what I've done to move that seam line from like a horizontal position to a diagonal position is I've taken some away from up here and added it down here, and I've taken some down here and added it up here. So I still have the same volume, it's just distributed differently where that seam line hits. So once you have that figured out, we can go ahead and get our seam allowance pieces back. And the reason that I had you hinge them or cut into partially is that we want to sort of reattach them onto our cup. Again, making sure that our apex points are meeting and the straight lines line up, and we'll just tape that back into place like this. So it's completely okay that these are overhanging. Again, we're going to clean that up in the final step of the pattern manipulation. So now I have my bottom cut piece like so, and I'm going to do the same thing for my upper cut piece. I'm going to make sure I'm matching in on my apex and then just following that straight line. So now we just need to sort of clean stuff up. And in this particular example, it looks really, really easy. All I'm going to do is sort of redraw this line over here on the wire side. I want to make sure that's a nice smooth line. I am going to sort of cut off all of these excess bits on either side here. It's fine. It's not going to make too much of a difference. So I'm going to clean up this curve on the wire line, get rid of my excess bits on both of these sections here. Again, I'm going to sort of clean up this curve and make sure it's nice and smooth and even. So here's where having a curved ruler makes it much more helpful in order to retrace this pattern. So what I'm going to do is probably retrace it onto a new piece of pattern paper, smoothing all of those things out, which I noted. The other thing you could do, if you don't want to retrace it, is just tape it onto another piece of paper and then sort of redraw your lines to figure out where you need to add that little bit extra. Is probably adding a little bit extra here, and maybe you need to add a little bit extra here where that sliver got taken off. So either way, it's up to you how you want to do it. So to start out, I would clean up my corner bits like so. So like I said, mine doesn't have a huge
discrepancy here, so there's not much I would change other than evening out this curve over here. This portion is a little bit of artistic license because there's not like any specific right way to do it. On this guy up here, it's probably a little bit more dramatic, especially on that wire side over here, you can see. So what I would probably do is split the difference, meaning I would take away some of this upper portion right here and then add on to some of the lower portion there. So I'd split the difference between those two. So if I was copying this one, I would probably go like, you would find a curve that looks like it matches. And it can take a little while. You'd probably do something like this, where I would get rid of some of the curve up here and then add on to a little of the curve down here. So that is all you really need to do to convert a horizontal seam into a diagonal seam, or vice versa. You can start with a diagonal, use the same method to convert yourself into a horizontal seam. And from my experience doing this a couple times, I find that as long as the original pattern fit me really well, the altered pattern fits just about the same. You're not really taking away or adding anything to the fit of the bra, you're just sort of moving that seam line. So as long as you're starting with a base pattern that fits you, you should have a pattern that fits you after doing this manipulation. I hope you guys have enjoyed this tutorial on how to convert from a horizontal seam to a diagonal seam, and be sure to come back next week when we have more sort of make it your own pattern manipulations. I'll see everyone next time. Take care.